Hi, today we're going to focus on Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3, a scene which focuses on three characters, Laertes, Ophelia, and their father Polonius. Now, just before this scene opens, Hamlet has just been visited by Horatio and a couple friends who've informed him of the shocking news that they have seen his father's ghost haunting the castle. Hamlet, depressed about the usurpation of the throne and his mother by his uncle, and of course in grief over his father's death, is a little, invigorated by this news. At least he's kind of snapped out of his depression somewhat, and he vows to go with them to the castle that evening in the hopes that he will see the ghost of his father and be able to have some conversation. Meanwhile, Laertes is getting ready to return to school in France, and before he leaves, he has a conversation with the lovely Ophelia. Now, Ophelia is a naive and sweet and very beautiful young woman who has also attracted the eye of our title character, Hamlet. So there's a budding romance taking place between Hamlet and Ophelia. He's been spending a lot of time with her, and that is exactly what her brother wants to talk to her about before he leaves. He begins by saying, "My necessaries are embarked. Farewell. And sister, as the winds give benefit and convoy is assistant, do not sleep, but let me hear from you again." She says, "Do you doubt that?" So he encourages her to write to him as soon as she can, and she says she will. And now he says this: "For Hamlet, the trifling of his favor, hold it a fashion and a toy in blood, a violet in the youth of primy nature, forward, not permanent, sweet, not lasting, the perfume and suppliance of a minute, no more." She says, "No more but so?" So he's told her, as for Hamlet and the attention he's been giving to you, just don't think that this is going to be permanent. This is just temporary. And she's disappointed, and she goes, you don't think it's going to be permanent?" Laertes says, "Think it no more. For nature crescent does not grow alone, enthuse and bulk, but as this temple waxes, the inward service of the mind and soul grows wide withal. Perhaps he loves you now, and now, nor soil nor caudle doth besmirch the virtue of his will. But you must fear his greatness weighed, his will is not his own. For he himself is subject to his birth. He may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself, for on his choice depends the sanctity and health of this whole state. And therefore must his choice be circumscribed unto the voice and yielding of that body whereof he's the head." Laertes has a good point here. He reminds his sister that Hamlet is the prince, and he cannot decide for himself who he's going to marry and who he will spend the rest of his life with. Because as we know from our experience with Disney movies, princes marry princesses. They don't marry Ophelias. And so, she needs to be careful about this, he tells her. He can't decide for himself. Even if he does love you, it doesn't mean he can marry you. Then, if he says he loves you, it fits your wisdom so far to believe it, as he in his particular act and place may give his saying deed, which is no further than the main voice of Denmark, goes with all. Then weigh what loss your honor may sustain, if with too credent ear you list his songs, or lose your heart, or your chaste treasure open to his unmastered importunity. Fear it, Ophelia. Fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affection, out of the shot and danger of desire. Now, it's kind of sweet and also kind of weird that her brother tells her this. He says, think about what loss your honor will sustain if you listen too closely and you believe Hamlet. He's encouraging her not to lose her heart and not to lose her chaste treasure and open it up to Hamlet. So he's also kind of suggesting to her that she not give her virginity to Hamlet, because he will not be able to marry her, and she will be ruined. Virtue itself scapes not calumnious strokes. The canker galls the infants of the spring too oft before their buttons be disclosed, and in the morn and liquid dew of youth Contagious blasts are most imminent. Be wary then. Best safety lies in fear. Youth to itself rebels, though none else is near. So he tells her, just be careful. She says this, I shall the effect of this good lesson keep as watchman to my heart. But good my brother, do not as some ungracious pastors do, show me the steep and thorny way to heaven, whilst, like a puffed and reckless libertine, himself the primrose path of dalliance treads and recks not his own reed. So she suggests to him that he follow his own advice and practice what he preaches when he goes off to school. At this point, their father enters. Laertes says, oh, fear me not, and then says, oh, I stayed too long, but here my father comes. A double blessing is a double grace. Occasion smiles upon a second leave. So he knows he's going to have to say goodbye to his father again. He's already said goodbye to him. He's going to have to say goodbye to him again. And of course, the loquacious Polonius is going to have some words before they part. Polonius says, yet here, Laertes, aboard for shame. The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail, and you are stayed for. There, my blessing with thee. We can assume he probably hugs or kisses him on that line. And then he says, and these few precepts for thy memory. He's got some advice for him. Now, although this advice is very good advice for a father to give a son, you can tell from the reaction of Laertes and Ophelia that he's told them this many times before. Nonetheless, still good advice. Look to your character, he tells them. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast in their adoption tried, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unfledged comrade. So he says there's a couple of things that you need to think about. First of all, give your thoughts no tongue, nor unproportioned thought his act. So don't say everything that you think. Keep some things inside, which is kind of ironic because Polonius never does that. And also, don't be reckless. Don't be impulsive. And then he talks a little bit about friendship, and he says, when you find a friend that is true, grapple them unto your heart. And it's good to make new acquaintances, and to have fun with them, but don't think that they are true friends. Not everybody is a true friend. Beware of entrance into a quarrel, but being in, bear that the opposed may beware of thee. Don't go around getting into fights, but if you do have to get into a fight, make sure that you fight well so that they are afraid of you. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Here, the talkative Polonius advises his son to not talk too much. Listen more than you talk. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Listen to other people's feedback and criticism of you, but do not judge them. Take care that you don't become a judgmental person. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not gaudy. For the apparel oft proclaims the man, and they in France, and of the best rank and station, are of a most select and generous chief in that. So he advises him, even with his clothing, buy the best clothing that you can afford, because the way you dress, the way you appear, says something about you as a person, but make sure that you don't dress gaudy and that you are very tasteful in your choices. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and a friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. So he cautions him against borrowing and lending, both of which can lose you friends and can affect relationships with other people. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day, that thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing seasoned this in thee. And that last line about to thine own self be true is an often quoted line from Shakespeare. So these are the pieces of advice that Polonius has to give to his son before he embarks. And it is clear from their reaction that they've heard this before. But Laertes is, of course, very polite, and he says to his father, most humbly do I take my leave, my lord. The time invites you, says Polonius. Go, your servants tend. And Laertes turns to go, but before he does, he says, farewell, Ophelia, and remember well what I've said to you. She says, 'tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it. And so off he goes. And as soon as he's gone, the nosy Polonius wants to know what they were talking about. "What is it, Ophelia, he hath said to you?" She says, "So please you, something touching the Lord Hamlet." "Marry, well bethought. 'Tis told me he hath very oft of late given private time to you, and you yourself have of your audience been most free and bounteous. If it be so, as so 'tis put on me, and in that way of caution I must tell you, you do not understand yourself so clearly as it behooves my daughter and your honor. What's between you? Give me up the truth." So notice there's definitely a difference between the way Polonius talks to his daughter and Laertes talked to his sister. I think that Laertes was really concerned about Ophelia's well-being. Polonius seems more concerned about her ruining his reputation. He says, "I've heard that Hamlet's been spending a lot of time with you. What's going on?" Ophelia says, "Well, he hath, my lord, of late made many tenders of his affection to me. He has given her little gifts and little indications that he cares for her." Polonius laughs and says, "Affection? You speak like a green girl, unsifted in such perilous circumstance. And do you believe his tenders, as you call them?" He says, do you believe he really cares about you?" She says, "Well, I do not know, my lord, what I should think." And he says, "Marry, I'll teach you. Think yourself a baby that you have taken these tenders for true pay, which are not sterling. Tender yourself more dearly, or, not to crack the wind of a poor phrase running it thus, you'll tender me a fool." There, I think his concern for himself really comes through, where he says, "Tender yourself more dearly, or you'll tender me a fool." Don't make a fool of yourself. It'll reflect badly on me. Ophelia says, "My lord, he hath importuned me with love in honorable fashion." She means by that he hasn't tried anything with me physically. He's been very honorable and very polite in his love for me. Polonius once again scoffs at that and says, "Ha! Fashion, as you may call it. Go to. She continues and says, "And he hath given countenance to his speech, my lord, with almost all the holy vows of heaven." Here you really see Ophelia's naivete and innocence. She says, "He swore to God that he felt this way, so he really must." Her father says, "Springes to catch woodcocks. I do know when the blood burns how prodigal the soul sends the tongue vows. These blazes, daughter, giving more light than heat, extinct in both, even in their promise as it is a maken, you must not take for fire. From this time, be something scanter of your maiden presence. Set your entreatments at a higher rate than a command to parley, for Lord Hamlet believes so much in him that he's young, and with a larger tether may he walk than may be given you. In few, Ophelia, do not believe his vows, for they're brokers, not of that dye which their investments show, but mere implorators of unholy suits, breathing like sanctified and pious bonds, the better to beguile. This is for all. I would not, in plain terms, from this time forth, have you so slander any moment leisure as to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet. Look to it, I charge you. Come your ways." And she says, "I shall obey, my lord." So Polonius goes one step further than Laertes, who was just cautioning his sister to be careful. Polonius says, "You know what? When young men, I know what young men are like. They only want one thing. I'm going to tell you, you are not to see him again. That's it." And she has no choice but to say, "Okay, I will follow your orders," because she is very submissive and she does what women did back in those days. She's going to do what her father tells her to do. But think about this. Earlier in the scene, in scene 1, Hamlet voiced his disappointment with his mother, who remarried so quickly. She seemed to love her husband, Hamlet's father, so much, but then as soon as he died, she now seems to love her new husband so much. And Hamlet concluded, if you remember, "Frailty, thy name is woman." He's very disappointed and discouraged and disillusioned with women who he thinks, based on his mother, love you one minute and the next minute they're on to the next guy. It doesn't matter. They're not capable of really loving truly and faithfully. This is how he feels about his mother. And now Ophelia is going to rebuff any further communication with him. So this is only going to further his distrust of women. It's only going to cement his idea that frailty, thy name is woman. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.